Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X-Force number 19, cover dated February 1993. The cover is by Greg Capullo, inked by Harry Candelario, and the cover caption declares the dream divided. So we get in this issue a follow-up to the Executioner's Song. This is an aftermath issue in which X-Force are reflecting on where their future lies in the wake of the apparent death of both Strife and Cable, and this leads to conflict with Professor X. But this cover really implies that punches are flying potentially here between Cannonball and his old headmaster Professor X, with Storm intervening. It really is an exercise in how to turn something that is a verbal argument about ethical principles into an excited, muscle straining looking cover. It's pretty well done by Greg Capullo. Let's open this one up to the splash page, and we do get a splash page with Boom Boom here making the splash. The title of the story is The Open Hand, The Closed Fist, and the creative team here over in the corner: Fabian Nicieza, writer; Greg Capullo, penciler; Harry Candelario, inker; Chris Eliopoulos, letterer; and Steve Buccellato and Marie Javins, both on colours. So the story opens inside Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters in Westchester, New York, where the members of X-Force, including Richter and Sunspot, are under a form of house arrest, while Val Cooper of X Factor and the government's Mutant Affairs liaison decides what to do with them, whether to try them as criminals, outlaws, and in particular for their theft from S.H.I.E.L.D. of the IPAC craft. But while all that's taking place, Boom Boom is working on new costumes for the team, starting with herself, and that is an over-the-top early 90s costume that she's whipped up for herself. And how has she done it? Well, this is a little callback to Chris Claremont, his original run. So there's a piece of Shi'ar equipment that Kitty Pryde used way back in Uncanny X-Men issues 156. And that is one where you can whip up a costume of whatever design. And that's what Boom Boom is using here at the X Mansion, and admiring herself in the mirror there, in particular her butt. And she's interrupted by the arrival of Lila Cheney, who tells Boom Boom that Sam's back. Now, Boom Boom has a broken jaw from the events of Executioner's Song, so she's not able to speak at full volume. And she says in response to Lila's message, "Oh, like he wants to see me," when hot shot rock star whose last album bombed big time Lila Cheney is hanging around. So Lila thinks that maybe it's time to have a little talk about Sam, and Boom Boom isn't taking her seriously. So Lila speaks up and says, "I'm sure if Hank McCoy heard you blabbing away through your broken jaw out loud to yourself, no less, he'd be less than thrilled. So how's about you shush for a change and just listen? Sam Guthrie and I are just friends. I'm too busy, he's too young. We had a little fling, that was back in the New Mutants days. That's all. You want him, then go for it." So Boom Boom is listening now, and she says, "You mean it?" And she's all delighted there. And then she says here, or rather Lila says to her, "Of course, it might be hard to land the cutie if you and the rest of X-Force do time in the vault." So that possibility is hanging over the whole of the story of this particular issue. So Boom Boom a little bit bummed out by that, and then the scene switches outside by the boathouse on the banks of the Sputin Devil Cove. And this is interesting to see who's going out to meet Roberto down by the lake, and it's Stevie Hunter. So Stevie Hunter, once upon a time, Kitty Pryde's dance instructor in Salem Center, and also after that dance instructor to Ileana Rasputin. And so she had she was there at the time when the New Mutants were being trained in the X Mansion by Professor X, so she knows Roberto going all the way back to the beginning of the New Mutants, back in 1983 in terms of publishing time. And she's come to check up on Roberto and see how he's getting on, because he's had a pretty rough time of it in terms of how Gideon, the external, has treated him in recent months. Still getting adjusted to this new manifestation of your solar absorption abilities, aren't you? She says to Roberto. And then she follows up and says, when you were students here, all of you always came out here when you wanted to think things out. Danny, Rain, especially you. And Roberto just turns around with a frown on his face saying, it's cold. A couple of things I want to note just before moving off this page. Great storytelling by Greg Capullo first and foremost, but also I detect, and you tell me in the comments whether you agree with me, a little influence by maybe John Romita Jr. of this era. Something about Lila's face there, and in particular the placement of her eyes and her cheekbone that reminds me of John Romita Jr. circa this time period when he's working on Punisher Warzone, and also after that then Daredevil, Man Without Fear with Frank Miller. In particular, look at this close-up on Lila Cheney's eye there. That's very John Romita Jr.-esque. In particular, the way that the eyelashes are rendered. So I just see, I don't know that it's 100% my conjecture, but I see a little bit of J.R. influence on Capullo at this time period. And then this is a really, really nice page here of the heart-to-heart between Stevie and Roberto, where she continues and says, I wouldn't think you'd feel it when you're solar charged, I mean. And he follows up and says, no, I meant our reasons for coming out here. They were kind of cold. We knew the professor hated running his wheelchair on the grass. It was hard for him to come all the way out here. So we knew he wouldn't bother, and then we could get some privacy. So Stevie recognizes maybe Roberto wants to be alone. Oh, you want me to leave, she asks. And he says, I don't even know if I want me to leave, Stevie. So he gets into it then. You can see that his eyes are watering a little bit. He's emotional. I've screwed up so much the last year. I feel as if I need someone to tell me who to be, what to do, because I don't know myself anymore. Look at me. Gideon manipulated me inside and out. Who am I going to be? What am I going to do? And Stevie then just hugs him around the shoulder and says, I don't know, Bobby. I don't know what's going to happen to any of you. And as I said, this is the question for this particular downtime issue, where there's reflection on what's the future of X-Force without Cable. But really great art on this page. I like the rendering of the autumn environment around them, and also the way that Greg Capullo has rendered this kind of forehead. This how would I describe it? This kind of flattened forehead or brow on Roberto. It's distinctive of his character, and I think it looks good. And another interesting choice here too is the fact that some of the members of X-Force who don't have any X-Force uniforms, like Roberto, they're not wearing their old New Mutants uniform. Instead, they're wearing the X-Men uniforms designed by Jim Lee a couple of years earlier. So interesting to see that. So then we get a bit of action, because that's what we're used to from X-Force, but you don't get any more action than this in effect in this particular issue. It's the Danger Room. We've got these three mutants who never were students of Professor X. So we've got Shatterstar, we've got Feral, we've got Richter there, and they are working off some steam in the Danger Room with the Shi'ar holographic projections. And so they're really tearing up their robotic antagonists. And then Richter calls out incoming at 4 o'clock. And there's a joke that goes all the way back to X-Force number 1 regarding Shatterstar, his being an alien and not being familiar with such kinds of terminology. And here he corrects Richter. He says, Richter, their approach appears closer to 5 o'clock to me. And Feral chimes in and says, so you can finally read a clock face. Anyway, she rips up those drones And she says, Cable forgot to tell you, most watches are digital now. They are? Asks Shatterstar. Fecht in his Mojo World dialect. So he throws his double-bladed sword and catches one of those drones, pinning it to the holographic rock. It's a really, really nice sequence. And then the simulation is over. And who's watching it from the control room except for the Beast? And he thinks to himself there, oh my stars and garters, Edna and Norton McCoy's furry baby boy is impressed. Scared, but impressed. Yeah, let's see what happens now. Oh yeah, something very interesting here is, how much Richter enjoyed the session. So you can see that in his body language there. Shatterstar always super serious about training, but this is great characterization. And I wonder, is it coming from Fabian Nicieza's script, or is it something that Capullo's thinking up? We've got Feral here, and there's no reference made to it by any of the other characters, but just like a cat, she is preening herself and licking her tail there. And so she's got it up in both hands, licking it there, and there we get to see the reverse angle on it as well. And as I said, nobody comments on it, but it is just so interesting and a little bit funny as well. And she says to Richter, enjoy it while it lasts, Mexicano. I doubt they'll let you do this when you're all in prison. So Richter lifts her up and he says, we all? Where are you going to be, kitty cat, even if we get sent up river? And she says to him, I ain't going to jail, Rick. No way, no how. And then we pick back up with the Beast, who's observing again from the control room. And he thinks, such a walking assortment of contradictions. Cable has trained them to fight in ways far better than we ever did at their age. But what about their attitude, their ethics? What can the X-Men do about those? What should we do? Now, I just want to comment on this before leaving the page. I mean, this is the theme of the issue in terms of the ethical attitude of these members of X-Force. They're that bit more extreme than the X-Men were. And what's the future for them without Cable? And should the X-Men let them have an existence as their own team after Cable's apparent death? But I want to comment on Chris Eliopoulos' lettering here. So at this time period, he had this habit of bolding certain words in the script by leaving them open for color, just like this should here on this page. And it's a little bit strange, the ones that he picks out for that particular treatment. I've commented on that before in the past. He stops doing it after a while. You can see it again here on this page, everybody, and over here, law, and so what, the phrase so what. So it seems a little bit random when he does it. Obviously there are words emphasized in the script, but instead of bolding them, he gives them this particular treatment. And I don't think I personally I'm a big fan of it, because it doesn't always seem to make sense which words he picks out for that particular treatment. So then we have, ironically, just as the Beast is wondering about the ethics of X-Force, we have two members, including Siren, Teresa Cassidy, and Warpath. And Siren's wondering about whether they should be doing what they're doing, but Warpath's that bit more extreme. He says, Terry, we're only copying some programs. Everybody does that. But we're copying them from the X-Men, she says. Doesn't that bother you in the slightest? And he responds here, the X-Men, Xavier, have never given me much, Teresa. They began their association in my life by taking my brother from me. They're ending it by keeping us under house arrest. The data we're accessing will help us do what they do, catch the bad guys, pure and simple. And Teresa finishes by saying, but don't we become bad guys in the process? Warpath's answer, well then, walking that fine line is what X-Force has been about all along, isn't it? Now the Professor, who's emotionally drained after the events of Executioner's Song and recovering from his bout with the techno-organic virus that was shot into him with a bullet by Strife in Uncanny X-Men 294, finds himself in those kinds of situations where he's emotionally drained or physically weakened. He's not as able to screen out the thoughts of those around him, so he picks up on what's happening elsewhere in the X-Mansion and Warpath, copying those files. Sigh, he thinks to himself, my enthusiasm during my rehabilitation notwithstanding, I am tired, emotionally as well as physically. Strife triumphed in that way at least. His revenge has played and preyed upon my spirit and convictions. But he's interrupted by the arrival of Storm and Cannonball, and you can see Cannonball's costume here is shredded from his most recent adventure, and that of course is going to create the opportunity for Boom Boom to design a new one for him a little later in the issue. And he says to the Professor, we need to talk. Storm says that, we need to talk, Charles. And Cannonball starts, he says, not to sound disrespectful by being blunt, but we've been comfortable prisoners for almost 3 weeks now, and we need to know what's going to be done with us. So Cannonball, in the absence of Cable, is the leader of the team. Storm says, Sam, as I told you, it was all the Professor could do to keep Val Cooper from removing you to a government detainment centre the moment Strife was defeated. And Cannonball replies again, not to be disrespectful, Storm, but so what? Have her charges with something. What did we do that's any more or less illegal than any of you have? Breaking and entering? Come on. Assault? Self-defense? Battery? Seems to me that comes with the territory. How many ins and outs can we all take? But the Professor, who looks quite angry there, says it's not simply about the law, Samuel. And here we get this first disagreement between the pair. And the drawing of this is so well done, such great storytelling by Capullo, and making what is essentially, or could be, just talking heads discussing, making it look visually interesting here by his choices of for the layout, and also when to have a close-up and when to pull back, for example, for this particular anchor image here. So the Professor says to Cannonball, it's about morals and ethics, about the right ways and the wrong ones. And Cannonball asks, it's about your dream, ain't it, Professor? It's about whether we're going to use the open hand or the closed fist. And that gives us the title of the story. And the Professor replies and says, maybe that is what this is all about then. And here Cannonball makes his big speech, first big speech. It's not the only one in this issue. He'll have another one a little later on, to his former headmaster, teacher, mentor, Professor X. He says, well, what do you want from us, sir? You took us in, you set us on this road, then you left the wheel in someone else's hands, Magneto's, for crying out loud. So he drives us this way and that, and finally abandons us on the side of the road. And a new driver comes along, maybe not the safest driver around, but he got us back on the road again, just not the same road. But we felt we were headed in the right direction. And now Cable's dead. But guess what, Professor? We've learned how to drive the car by ourselves. So a little bit of a tortured metaphor there, but nonetheless, it looks like Storm and the Professor have nothing to say to Cannonball. We've got that silent panel there, and Cannonball finishes up by saying, are you ready to let us do that? I.e., let them go, and to hell with Val Cooper and the government. And then we have a scene switch to Norwell, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. And somebody called Vanessa is not opening the door to her housemate. And of course, she looks like a mutant. And something's up with her. And we're going to find out which Vanessa this is in subsequent issues. And it's a callback to Greg Capullo's first issue on the title, that is X-Force number 15. In terms of the identity of this particular person here. Let's get back to the story. Wow, look at that. Turn the page and you have got a huge anchor image there of the SHIELD helicarrier. And who's come aboard except for G.W. Bridge And again, this is going back to issues 14 and 15, which was the continuity that we had before everything was interrupted by Executioner's Song. And GW Bridge has been summoned to the heli character to answer to both General Clark and also Henry Peter Gyrick. And it's all in respect of the disastrous Weapon Prime mission. And GW Bridge isn't interested in getting given out to, so he says to Gyrick, he says, "How can you censor me over the Weapon Prime operation? That was a see no evil op anyway. S.H.I.E.L.D. had no participation in it." So Gyrick says to him, $33 billion worth of non-involvement, Colonel. The training, the time, the equipment, and the stolen IPAC unit. And the general says, "You forgot to mention the men we lost, Peter." "Oh yes. Grizzly, missing. Tiger Strike, a walking cast. Yeti, missing. Richter, he defected, for God's sake, and we still have no idea whatsoever has happened to Cable. Do we, Colonel Bridge?" So GW Bridge, you can see the look on his face there, and he stalks off in silhouette. "Forget this, forget you. I quit." So, interesting kind of denouement to the disaster, the debacle of Weapon Prime getting trashed by X-Force. And then we're back to the X-Mansion, and here we get to see the fruits of Boom Boom's designs, new costumes for the members of X-Force. And there's a little crack here in Fabian Nicieza's dialogue for Warpath regarding Rob Liefeld's design of his costume. So let's see, Warpath says here of the new costume, "It's not bad at that." And he says a little bit more quietly, "At least now I can turn my neck without smacking myself in the chin with my shoulder pads." That has to be a crack at Liefeld. And next up is Cannonball. So Boomer's pushing him into the Shi'ar costume design contraption. And as he's in there, she's obviously fiddling around with different designs. This is pretty funny. He says, "Hey, not so much skin." So she calls him coward. "Come on out, Mason Dixon." And here he is with his new costume. He says he can live with it. So, what are your thoughts on Greg Capullo's new designs for the costumes for the members of X-Force? Better or worse, in your opinion, than Liefeld's designs, if you cast your mind back to X-Force number 1? And let's see what happens then. Oh yeah, so they're onto the main topic, which is the question of whether did Xavier make a decision yet. Warpath asks Cannonball. Cannonball says to Warpath, he's still thinking about it. "What do you think?" asks Warpath. "I don't think what they think much matters to us anymore." And Warpath asks, "What if they don't agree, Sam?" "I'd hate for it to come down to it," says Sam, "but I'll fight for our freedom, no matter who I'm fighting against. The rest of you going to be with me?" Warpath says, "Every hard step of the way, Mason Dixon." And I really like the difference in sizes between the characters that Greg Capullo is showing here. So Warpath, not as massively huge as he was in Rob Liefeld's pencils, but he's got to be, like 7 foot tall there. He's a big man, but not ridiculously huge. So the proportions for the characters, heroic, yes, but not as exaggerated as they were in Rob Liefeld's pencils. And this is a nice scene on the grounds of the mansion. And again, you can see the autumn environment, and that makes for some nice colors on this particular page as well. And Professor X goes for a chat with Teresa Cassidy. So she's the oldest of the members of X-Force, and she's taken by surprise by the professor. And she says to him, "I was just admiring the colors. Looks like a lot like Ireland come autumn, you know." And she's not wrong about that. And the professor says, "Yes, I've always found the grounds lovely this time of year, as inspiring in its own way as Muir Island. Why did you decide to leave it?" So Teresa turns around and says to him, "Wasn't much to leave now, was there? After the Shadow King and his assault on us, both inside Our very souls and out, Mer Island became a dead place. And I felt dead inside as well, Professor, as dead as the grave. So this refers back to the Mer Island saga, the Shadow King business, in particular in Uncanny X-Men issues 278 to 280. That's what Siren is referring to. And she continues saying to the Professor, I needed to be with people. And the Professor says, you would have been more than welcome to come here, i.e. to join the X-Men. And she says, no, you don't understand, Professor. I wanted to be with people who were like me. People who were dead inside as well. People too wounded, too angry to be with anyone else. That's why I went with Cable and his lot. So the Professor's taken aback and he says, I didn't know. I'm sorry. And she says, me too. And now we're coming alive again, Charles, she says, like springtime. I see us all in bloom, and I want to work this wondrous new garden and watch it grow. But grow into what, he asks. That's the best part of it all, don't you see? I don't know. It's free and wild and exciting and unknown. It's just the wonder of the process that counts the most. And that's a really good smile that Greg Capullo's drawn on her face. The eyes are smiling as well as the mouth. That's difficult to do, and he's done it very well there. And then the scene switches. We're still outside the X-Mansion itself, but on the grounds of the estate at the boathouse. So Roberto's stayed there. Stevie's left, and Cannonball comes to talk to him. Been here all day, he asks him. It was just a nice day to just be, you know, says Roberto. I was thinking it was a nice day to decide what we should become. Really? And what did you decide, Sam? See what I mean? Look, why is decide so bolded and underlined there in Heliopolis's lettering? It just kind of doesn't make sense. But in any case, Cannonball says, head back to the mansion and we'll tell the Professor. Roberto asks, we'll tell the Professor? Just go on. Aren't you coming? Be there in a second, says Cannonball. I have to get something out here first. And then the scene switches precisely to the Professor's study in the X-Mansion, and we get our first good look at all the new costumes that Boomer's designed for her teammates. So again, let me know what you think about these new looks, these kind of tweaks and twists on Rob Liefeld's designs. Do you prefer them? Do you think they're much of a muchness with his, or worse than his? Let me know. And Cannonball says to the Professor, it's time for us to leave. So the Professor here says, in reply, would that it were so simple, Samuel. He keeps calling him Samuel. Frankly, sir, I don't see why it ain't, replies Cannonball. We haven't been charged with anything, and even if we were, you and I both know the government would have a real hard time making their case stick. This is a really interesting downshot three-quarter profile on the Professor. Nothing you say is untrue, Sam, although it is a bit simplistic. So now Sam snaps. You can see it there, the expression on his face. He says, no more simplistic than your dream, is it? Or Magneto's separation theories, or Cable's get him before they get you attitude. Nothing's as simple as you all want to make it. We've already learned that much. Now the next step is seeing what we do with what you taught us. And the Professor says it can all be boiled down to simple questions. Sam, will you walk the path of violence or salvation, disruption or unity, the open hand or the closed fist? So the Professor's saying it's a dichotomy. There is the right way or the wrong way. And now we get this tight close-up on Sam's eye and that look of determination in it. Funny you should bring that up, sir. This is a great page coming up. This is really good stuff from Nicieza coming up on this particular page. So he puts his fist right in front of the Professor's face and says, here's my closed fist, Professor. It can be used the way Cable taught us, to hit, to pound, ways you say you don't agree with, right? And then he opens the fist, and that's what he was looking for out on the grounds when he was down with Roberto. But it can also be used to warm, to support, to protect. As for the peaceful approach of the open hand, well, that can be used to hurt as well. And he slaps the Professor, or he's about to slap the Professor on the side of the head. But the Professor moves quickly And look at that look of determination in his face as well. Your point is made, Sam. So he won't allow himself to be struck on the cheek by his former pupil. But look at the little field mouse in Sam's hand as well. And look at the way that Capullo has drawn it. It's shivering there in the palm of his hand. But he's kept it safely. And the professor says, and notice also the choice here. We've got an open border panel. Keeps things interesting in terms of the layout on the page, but also the decision to put the professor here in silhouette so that our eye goes to Sam and his reaction as he's holding his wrist, almost as if the professor injured it a little bit. You are no longer children, and I've no desire, no right to be your judge, says the professor. The world is changing for our kind, growing ever more dangerous, ever more dark. You must take the path your conscience dictates. You're all free to go, free to decide your own destiny. And so out they go. They leave the professor's study out the front door, and Lila Cheney's out there waiting. How'd it go, Sam? As well as can be expected, Lila, he says. And I love this little bit in the script, and also how Capullo's drawn it. Ferrell has stayed in the study even as the professor is leaving, and she grabs, or she doesn't even grab it, she pins the field mouse with her claw, kills it. You can see it there in the sound effect. And she's lifting it up to her mouth there and licking her lips in anticipation of eating it. So yeah, a couple of comic moments with Ferrell in this particular issue. Stuff that Liefeld never did with her at all. And clearly Nicieza enjoying the freedom to do this in his script, and Capullo doing a great job of realizing it in the pencils. This is interesting, the technique here used on Richter's boots. Reminds me of the way that Silvestri would render drapery. Also here on Lila's jacket as well. Same thing, it reminds me of Silvestri a bit. So clearly Capullo studying the likes of John Romita Jr. and Silvestri, even as he has his own style. So Lila says, ready to go, gang? And Shatterstar asks, are we all expected to leave in only one of these vehicles? And she says, no, Ponytail, I have my own means of transportation, namely a teleportation rift like you've never seen. Folks, next stop Camp Verde, Arizona, by way of Alpha Centauri. So that's pretty cool. And then we're on to the last page. 22 pages of story in this issue. The professor has come out onto the driveway to ask Sam one last time, are you certain about this? And Sam responds, nope, but it's the choice we've made. And Sunspot says, take good care of yourself, sir. Don't worry too much about us. This ragtag mess of a team has a habit of landing on their feet. And the professor says, goodbye, Roberto. So these are the two original members of the New Mutants that are, members of the current iteration of X-Force. So it's nice to have those little moments there between the professor and his former students. And then Cannonball says, I hope you won't get into any trouble with Val Cooper or the government. And the professor says, look, I can handle that. I still worry, though, whether you can handle them. And he means X-Force. The X-Force bunch, says Sam, they're good people, sir. Just some rough edges. And now the professor reveals what we saw earlier. 2 of your good people stole 20 years worth of data from my computers earlier. And Sam is shocked. What? Who was it? So he's there, annoyed, angered. But the professor says, you'll do nothing, Sam, except realize that this is the path you've chosen. One filled with second guessing and moral compromises. And Sam is not deterred from his course. And so he says, so let's see where the road leads us, Professor. Then walk the path with care, son. Walk the path with care. So the professor won't even... It's interesting, he has concern and care for Sam and Roberto and the others, but he won't use Sam's metaphor of the car like being driven. Instead, he talks about walking. So that's interesting, just that degree of characterization there, just coming out in little nuances of the dialogue between them. Sam's metaphor of the car and the professor talking about walking. Walk the path with care. So a really nice and offbeat issue of X-Force, because under Liefeld and subsequent to Liefeld, The action has been non-stop in the title, and this is the first time there's been any time for the characters to breathe and take stock and decide what it is that they want to do next. And so, yeah, this has been a really great issue in my estimation. One page of letters here concerning issue number 14 of the title. There's a little plug there for Fabian Nicieza and Joe Madureira's Deadpool miniseries upcoming because of the popularity of the character with readers. Next issue, a Stark International satellite, Greymalkin, S.H.I.E.L.D. and War Machine all spell trouble for our mutant renegades, and Sam gets the shock of his life. Be here for assault on Greymalkin. So, you know, after the Executioner's song, everybody thinks that Cable is dead, but is he dead? I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on X-Force number 19. If you enjoyed it, please like the video on YouTube. It really does help the channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.